Hello everyone, welcome and thank you very much for attending our first talk. And we hope you will enjoy it and find it useful. And who knows, maybe it will even kickstart your sound journey. Also, don't worry if you have no experience at all or not even musical experience. Of course, it can be helpful, but it's definitely not necessary. And let's get right into it, I would say. First, with some words about ourselves. We're gonna, of course, talk about sound design, a crash course given by Attenuate. But who is Attenuate or what is Attenuate? Attenuate is an audio outsourcing company based in Belgium, made up of three guys, which you can see in the bottom of your screen. And you're gonna hear about them a bit more later. But yes, Attenuate is based in Belgium, all around Flanders, and we do audio outsourcing. Um, why did we start this company? Well, out of passion, obviously, but one of the main ideas was to give accessibility to indie studios to premium audio services. Because from personal experience and also from stories we've heard around us in the industry, that's usually where the demand is. Because high profile studios usually have people in house. Uh, double A's, it's also still a gray area, but indie studios require these services because they usually cannot afford a sound designer on a full-time basis. But the problem is always funding with indies. It's always the rates that are expensive because it's still a specialized job. And that's why Attenuate was created, to be able to give that to the people, because we know how it is, because we've been there. And then on the other side, why are we giving this talk? Um, because we like audio and we also want to share the knowledge with people, because we also learned from other people, and it's kind of like a civic duty in a way of giving back to the people. That's what we think. And also, there is a nice quote that I wanted to share with you, which is that um, a candle doesn't lose anything by lighting another. So that's what we're trying to do right now. We're trying to light your candles, trying to make the world a bit brighter, but with audio knowledge. And of course, on the other hand, the reason why we're giving it is also for a bit of awareness, a bit of advocacy for the audio discipline, which to this day in the industry is still a bit neglected, I would say. Even dare say not appreciated as much as it deserves, because I mean, this is not the fault of the people, but it's something that's a bit more niche, and people don't really know, they cannot gauge how difficult it is to do all this stuff. So hopefully after this talk you'll be able to do your own sounds, but also if you're gonna work in the future with a sound designer or another person that does sound, audio engineer, whatever, you can understand their struggles and be a bit more empathetic and also value them the way they deserve. But yeah, that's a bit about Attenuate. I'm also going to go ahead and introduce ourselves individually. You can see popping up on the screen very beautifully is my colleague Zain, also on the bottom of your screen here to my right, and I will give the word to him.
Hello guys, I'm Zane. I am a technical sound designer at Attenuate, next to my two colleagues. I would say that I am more of a generalist in the team, but I am striving more towards like maybe a bit more of the creative sound design when it comes to sci-fi and stuff like that, sounds that have a lot of modulation. And when it comes to implementation, I'm definitely more on like the middleware side with Fmodwise. But here at Attenuate, we all just experiment with everything. We kind of teach each other as well. I did my internship at Sonic Picnic in Utrecht, Netherlands. There, I got to see how an audio outsourcing studio works inside out. We are heavily using this knowledge at Attenuate as well. And I got to work on a bunch of different things, both technical and creative. And, I learned a bunch of things as well. And I think that's most of what I had to say about myself. So I'll just give it away to the next one.
Right, that is going to be me. So hello, I am the voice. Wait, my bad. I'm the voice you've been hearing already. My name is Patrick, and I'm also a technical sound designer and co-founder at Attenuate next to Zane and Jill. We all studied at DAE. We graduated. Uh, I personally dabbled around with some contests, some uh, yeah game competitions and whatever. Got some awards here and there. Interned at XR Labs in Brussels, which most of the people won't know, but it's actually a collaboration between the police and the military, where they do really cool stuff. And my role there was obviously as a sound designer, working on their virtual reality, extended reality training simulator, and I basically overseen the entire audio pipeline. So that was mostly implementation, making frameworks from scratch, tools, sound effects, recordings, etc. But like Zane said, we are all kind of generalists, but we do have our own niches inside the company, inside Attenuate. And I'm more on the creative side of things, I would say. Also, I am more of a responsible when it comes to orchestral music, unlike electronic music, which is more of Zane's specialty, or acoustic, which is with Jill. And then, yeah, Foley, and I'm also mostly overlooking Unreal Engine meta sounds. And with that, I think that's mostly everything about myself. So I'm going to also let Jill speak.
Yep. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm also a technical sound designer, like my two fellow colleagues here. I graduated the IE, and I had no prior experience in the field, which does mean you can get into this without having any prior dabblings in anything audio related. I did my internship at Triangle Factory. It's a VR game development company based in Ghent, Belgium. I was there for approximately 9 months, and I primarily created audio assets, but then later on also implemented more through a middleware program called Wise. Uh, Personally, my profile is a lot more focused towards technical implementation and then designing secondary. And most of my creative aspects have been used in realistic settings. Specifically, gunplay has been a large part of my design aspects. And yeah, that's about it. I think we can move on.
We can move on indeed. Just 1 second to control the PowerPoint. Yes, so going back to why we are here in the first place, the talk. So we're going to try to teach you how to sound design in an hour, which is not an easy thing to do. So bear with us. That's why, to make it easier for you, we kind of split it in a couple chapters. We're going to start with the basics of sound designs, which is going to be given by Jill. He's going to talk about concepts like sound selection, layering, auditory rhythm, and frequency content, which are very relevant for sound design. Then Zane is going to tell us about basic audio editing, such as removing clicks and pops, looping, so how to do it properly, how to, uh, do it in the first place, I guess. Then clip placement and creative editing. So we're gonna look at how to use effects to achieve what we want and bend sounds to our desire. Then Zane is also going to give us some audio tips and tricks. So he's gonna talk about rendering and when and how to make variations, some shortcuts I think as well, and then a bit on sound creation hierarchy, which is basically how much time should you spend on something, like based on how important it is in your project. And then at the end of it, we're also going to give you some resources that we gather along the time, made by either people that we know or companies that have really good resources for starting sound designers. And of course, a Q&A, which for us is going to mean that we give you the information that you can contact us on our website or on LinkedIn or comment on this video or whatever, and we'll answer every question. Promise. I will answer it personally if Jill and Zane don't want to do it. But besides that, before doing all of these, I want to do something, and I introduced a slide at the last moment, which is called Sound Design 101. Sound Design 101 101 is a little section I added so I can kind of get you up to speed with what we're going to be talking about. It's kind of trying to explain some basic concepts, some terminology that we're going to use. So hopefully it's going to clear some things out for later. But I don't want to spend too much time on it, so we're going to go like rapid fire, right? So bear with me. We're going to start with amplitude. Amplitude might be something you already know from physics. For now, all you have to know that the bigger the amplitude, the louder the sound. Then frequency. For us, frequency is relevant because, as you may know, human hearing goes from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. And when we sound design, we try to cover, most of the time at least, the entire audible spectrum, so we can have those sounds that feel full. In our talk later, we're going to be mentioning a lot lows, mids, and highs. So what I want you to know from this is that the lows are usually the bass, the mids are usually the main characteristics of the sound, and then the highs are, for example, the tinnitus effect after a flashbang, or like screeching or bird calls. So it's really those high frequencies. And then waves. So waves, all waves are complex waves most of the time in nature. But complex waves in nature are made out of sine waves. You also have other type of waves, but these waves are unnatural. So triangular waves, square waves, sawtooth waves, whatever, this can only be achieved with synthesizers. Why I'm telling you this? Maybe you already had that idea of, if I'm going to make something unnatural, so maybe something sci-fi, and you want to start by creating a sound that is based on one of these unnatural waves instead of the sine wave. So it's kind of like understanding the basic principles so you can later on build upon it. And ADSR, I'm gonna briefly talk about this. This is more of an important term when you're working with synthesizers because I mentioned them in the previous term. If you think about pressing on a piano key, the ADSR envelope just shows visually how the sound is going to behave. So you have the attack, decay, sustain, and release. So the attack is the curve that the sound volume is going to follow when you press on the key. The decay is going to be the curve that the sound is going to follow to reach the sustain. The sustain is the volume that's going to be held as long as you're holding onto the key, and then release, as the name implies, if you release your piano key, it's going to still like let it ring based on that release curve. So why is this important? You can use this envelope later on to really like manipulate sound up to like the millisecond and make it do what you want. If you want a sound that slowly fades in like a pad, then you want it to have a long attack and long release, and these are just a couple. This is just an example for usage of ADSR envelope, but it's a very complex topic I'm not going to get into. I'm gonna go to the next one. Timbre. Timbre is also very important because if you noticed, when I was talking about waves, I told you that every natural sound is made out of complex waves, or, what is a complex wave is just a bunch of sine waves together. And timbre is exactly that. Because you may think, why do notes sound different if it's the same wave, at the same wavelength? Like, for example, A is at 440 hertz. Why does it sound different if it's literally the same thing, but you're playing it through different instruments? It's timbre. Timbre basically is that complex wave that gets created based on the instrument shape, the air, the way it bounces around, reflections, thickness of material, everything influences the sound. And based on all those parameters, we get different complex waves, different timbres, even though they are the same note. This is obviously interesting because you want to select your proper timbre. This is like the character of your sound. So when you're designing, you want to start with, a proper base. So sound selection is going to talk about this later on. Then space, really quickly talking about space, you have mono and stereo. That's relevant for us right now. Of course, you have 5.1, 7.1, etc. But I wanted to bring mono and stereo up, so you know that mono is just one signal sent to all your output speakers, and stereo is two signals, usually left and right. Why is this important in the frame of game development? Most people maybe don't think about, but stereo is two waves. What does that mean? It's double the size. So if you care about optimization, this is a good thing to know. You can halve the size of your audio assets just by making stuff mono. And in fact, most of the time, game audio is mono because it's spatialized inside the engine. You can either render this in Reaper or your go-to DAW already in mono, or just let the preferred engine do it for you. But yeah, it's just very important that you know this. But of course, stereo is two files, a 4-channel is a 4-track, and you can go crazy with it. This is, for example, a 64 channel wave file, which has not many practical uses. There are, of course, the special uses, but we won't talk about them. But I just wanted you to see that it's possible. We can do it, but we don't have to. Then, okay. Also, panning just means bouncing the signal from one speaker to another. Then for signal flow, which is the last term I'm going to go over, signal flow I wanted to bring up because the way it works, so you have your input, you have your sound, then it goes usually through a processing phase, so that's where the effects are. It goes sequentially through your effects, so the order of effects matters, and then it comes out as the output. So input, processing, output. That's the signal flow. Very rudimentary said. Now, another thing you should know about this is that you can mix your signal. So we use the terms wet and dry. A wet signal is 100% your output. A dry signal is 100% your input. Think about if you have a sound and you want to add echo to it, you want to add reverb to it. If you have 100% wetness, the only thing that's coming out is the reverb, the echo. 100% dryness is just your input sound. You combine them, you can play around and give your sound different reverbs based on where your player is in a game, for example. So that's one way of working around this. But again, all you have to know from this is effects order matter, they are sequential, and wet and dry. Then one more short word about Reaper, because I mentioned it again. Reaper is a DAW, digital audio workstation. This is basically a digital studio. Like think of those big studios with like 50,000 like knobs and buttons. That's Reaper. You may know other DAWs like FL Studio or Ableton or Cubase, whatever. We use mostly Reaper. Why do we use Reaper? Because it's almost free. Like the price that they are giving away this product is an insult for themselves. They should like charge us more for this because it's so good. That's also why it became an industry standard, not only because it's a very low price tag, but because it's absurdly, like stupidly customizable. You do get Reaper as a skeleton, maybe that's why it also has a low price tag, but you can do so many things with it. If you're into programming and scripting, you're gonna have a fun time with this one because you can optimize your workflow like tremendously. Even later on when we're gonna share our screen, you're gonna see that Jill's, Zane and mine look completely different. Our Reapers are completely different, optimized for our own workflows because it's a very personal thing. And I think this is also everything I wanted to say. I hope I didn't yap too much because now we're gonna get into the actual like bread and butter of sound design, and I will let Jill handle it.
Yes. Hello. Let's get into some more practical stuff. Let's hear some things. My screen should be opened. So let's start with sound selection, since that is always going to be step one when designing something. And it's arguably maybe the most important step that you have to take when you're designing something, because it's what's going to make you work hard in order to get where you want to be, or it's going to be smoother depending on the sound that you find. The first thing with sound selection is style relevancy. If you're having a realistic project, well, you're going to want to find a realistic sound effect. If you have more of a stylized thing and it wants to be really cutesy, you can go for a very cartoony vibe, for example. So when selecting your sound, you need to identify what style is the project that I'm working in. So here we have a realistic one. It's realistic punch. And we have a cartoony punch. More of a slap, but you get the idea. A second part of sound selection is low versus high quality. Sometimes, and Zane will go over this later, you can clean up certain audio files, but sometimes it is just easier to say, okay, I'm going to take another 5 or 10 minute look to see if I can find something that also matches what I want, but has a little less noise or better quality to it, because this is the difference between low and high quality. So this is going to be low quality. You can see there's a lot of noise. You hear the reverb in the room, or the echo in the room is recorded. So this is not ideal. If you're going to put this in the game, it might mismatch with the rest of your assets, or it won't be spatialized in the right room. So if you then go for more high quality, that means it's drier, so you have a lot more freedom to do with it as you want. Like here, there's barely any echo. There's still some, but it's negligible, and you could work with this. It will fit. The next topic I want to talk about is frequency content. Patrick already touched upon this shortly. It's your low end, which is usually bass, mids, the general. That's where most of the sounds are going to be in, and then highs are again those like extra details where certain sound effects will kind of crash through and not get lost in that heap of mid frequencies where a lot of sound resides. So you can use frequency content to your advantage, but it can also be something at your disadvantage. If you have a lot of low-end sounds that are clumped together, a lot of nuance and context might start to get lost. Like you won't be able to discern anymore what you're hearing, but you can make it work for you as well. For example, we have a punch here, and the mid-range of the punch is just this. It's a hit, very simple. But if we want to add some extra punch to that, we're going to add a lower end layer that will give it that extra kick, as it is literally a kick drum. So you can feel it becoming punchier, so to speak. And the highs in this case will add some character to the punch. In this case, it's a more meaty punch. So you are hitting something with skin. So it's a good thing to be aware of what frequency content is. It's what lies between 20 hertz, 20 kilohertz. Be aware of it. Be aware of the dangers with having too many high sounds together or too many low sounds together, to keep it differentiated so that everything that you want to pull through there gets pulled through. Now, next is auditory rhythm, and that is it can be a bit abstract at first, but trust me, it is not as difficult as it sounds. It's more of a feeling thing, because the easiest way to explain it is it impacts all aspects of audio, but it's most easily noticed in music because the auditory rhythm is literally the notes, the beats that create the groove and tempo of the music. So that's what auditory rhythm is, but it also applies to sound effects. In sound design specifically, it is recurring elements that form a pattern and that conveys different concepts depending on what you need. It can create pace, energy, or tension. Like footsteps are a pattern that form pace. If you have water dripping in a very dark, moody environment, that will be the thing that's creating tension if it's at a steady rhythm. And mechanical sounds like an engine that is rattling and then hissing every once in a while, that hiss is just like in a rhythm. It can feel like there's energy in the room. And here we have a mechanical rhythmic loop. I'm gonna let you play for a bit. So you can hear the movement in there, and it's like almost on a beat. That creates movement in your environment, in the scene that you want to create. And then you can also use it to build up audio, to sort of, it's a feeling, kind of. It makes sense that it has these steps. So here there's a charge up, there's then the shot, and then there's the tail. And if you were to loop this, for example, it might start to feel rhythmic and there's movement to it. Also in dialogue, for a character breathing, if that's on a certain rhythm, it will again build up tension. It's very specifically things like that, so it does apply to almost all aspects of your design. Then we have layering, which can be somewhat of an advanced thing to get into because there's a lot to learn in layering. Basically what layering is, if you take a simple gunshot, for example, it might sound a bit flat, like we have here. This is a shotgun turret. If we were to just play the shot, it would feel a bit, it works, it's just bland. There's not much to it, there's not much going on. And let's say we want to have it be a stylized gunshot, but you may still want to start from something like this. And then we add some cartoony layers to make it stylized. And even those cartoony layers, there's two of them. So the first one is a little bit of like a sci-fi sound to make it sound stylized. And then the second one is like a very Western whiz to it. And together with the shot, that already creates something that's a lot more stylized. Now, the shot still lacks power And if you remember what we learned in frequency content, we might want to add some bass to this thing. So we're adding a kick, and if you compare, that already feels punchier. But we want more in that bassy layer, because when you're designing something like a gun, if you want a simple pistol, you will have a shotgun. If you have a shotgun, you will have an explosion. That's kind of how that works. It's always more extreme. So we add some explosion layers to the sound, and now it's really punchy. But the shotgun might have a mechanical effect to it, and then you can add that as well as another extra layer of depth. And you hear some mechanical gears in there. So that's layering. There's many things you can do. The easy thing is to identify, look at what you're creating, try to take parts from what you're creating and think, what would these parts separately sound like? And then you can kind of combine them. And if you keep in mind the frequency content, so that every detail gets his own living room, you will create a fuller sound than just one wave file. Okay, I think that is it for the theoretic basics.
Just 1 second. Can you like replay all the sounds again? Like start, with the first one, like clip selection. Just like do like a short recap, because I made your share screen louder, and maybe you can now hear the sounds better.
Okay, so just recapping?
Yeah, just like a quick recap, and play the sound.
Okay. So, for a short recap, your first step is sound selection, where you will pick your style. You will look at quality. This is good. And this is less ideal. Some would say bad, but there's no such thing. Then we go frequency content, where you identify the separate layers that build it up together. Then auditory rhythm just gives you a sense of pattern, like we hear in the machine here. You want to create movement, you want to create some space into here, some energy. And that can be applied to more complex sound effects, like in here. Then layering. We went through all the layers. We wanted it to be a shotgun shot, so we started from there. Then we took some cartoony layers to make it stylized. We added a kick to give it more power. We added explosions to give it even more power. And then we took some mechanical aspects of the machine we're building to also add that in there as tiny little details that add to the whole thing.
That's good. Okay. Thank you very much. The recap was good, the talk was good, but now that we got you hooked, we're gonna have Zane. And Zane, if you share your screen.
Yep. Give me a sec.
We're gonna have Zane telling us about audio editing, which is also very important, because we can select sounds, but most of the time we don't find what we want, and then we have to make it ourselves, or it's bad and we have to fix it.
Yep.
Right. Zane, you have the word.
If you are to give me the pleasure of doing so. All right, so I'll try to keep this concise. I'm here to teach you some techniques that you'll probably be using a lot when just finding sounds on the internet and plopping them in. The first thing that I wanted to talk about was different methods of looping. This is probably one of the most common techniques that you're going to be utilizing. So there are different methods to loop, and we're going to go through some of the most common ones. Now first, let's look at the sound file, which is unlooped, and let's see if we can loop it. See, this isn't really loopable right now, since at the beginning and at the end, the sound kind of goes down in volume and goes up in volume. Now, how can we loop this? One of the first methods I wanted to look at is called the head to tail method. Now, what does this actually entail? Pun intended. You actually take the unedited sound file. Let's say we have this sound file over here. This is the same as the original. What you want to do is look at the head of the sound, pick an arbitrary point, make a cut right there. You're gonna want to bring it to another track. See, I already did it right here. Let's get rid of that. What you want to do is then add a fade in. So what is a fade in? All it does is it just brings in the volume from 0 all the way up to whatever the waveform's volume is at that point of the head. And then you want to do the opposite actually to the tail of the sound, which is the end of the sound. So I'm going to do a fade out. So it's going to get the volume back down to 0 after a short time determined by you. So after you've done that, you've kind of made them go into each other. So this first sound is going to go back to 0. The second sound, which was the head before, is going to bring it back. And that way it should be looping nicely. Just like that. This method is quite good for sounds that are maybe musical, that are more rhythmic, since it does preserve timings and all that good stuff. Let's look at another method, which is right here. Now, this is not the official name. It's called the crossfade method here. Don't actually know the official name. This is just how I like to do my fades or my loops. So we have the same file again. You want to look at the beginning and at the end again. You want to get rid of parts that you don't think loop well or that aren't really nice. So let's say this part that goes up from 0. Let's look at the end. We have this part that goes down to 0. I don't like this. Then all you want to do is pick another arbitrary point from the end, so the tail of the sound. Bring that back to the beginning, and then you'll see if we do this, it actually won't loop very well because of this part right here. So it'll be a very abrupt jump. So what you want to do is you just want to nudge it into the second file. And what this will do is this will create a crossfade. What is a crossfade? It is just a combination of a fade in and a fade out with two audio files going into each other. Now, when you're doing something like this, let me play this. You have to check that this crossfade is working well. So say that it's still too abrupt or something wrong is going on, you can always just change the length, make it smoother, or sometimes even more abrupt, whatever works for your sound file. Just use your ears and try to figure it out. In our case, it actually worked quite well, so we'll keep it like that. This method works basically on the same kind of files as the first method, which is the head to tail method. I just like this since you can do everything on one track instead. Let's look at another very widely used method. For this one, we're going to look at this track right here, actually. Let's say we have this over here. So you see, this is called the zero crossing method. Now, what does the zero crossing method actually entail? Let's get a random file back in here. Let's say we just have a file. If you've noticed, if you zoom really hard into the waveform, let me actually find one right here. You'll notice there's a horizontal line that is in the middle of the waveform. This is called the null line, I guess, which means that this point of the waveform has 0 volume. So whatever samples, so each one of these circles is an individual sample of your sound. Whenever a sample hits that line, it actually has zero volume. What this means is that if you cut and loop at a point which is a zero crossing, any file that's looping at that zero crossing point will loop perfectly. Now what we're gonna realize is that this doesn't mean that you should use this all the time, but I'll tell you later on after we've done this. So let's say we find a zero crossing like this one. Let's make a cut. By the way, while we're doing this, I'll show you that in Reaper, you can find a ton of very helpful shortcuts. And one of the ones I'm using here is this one. Move edit cursor to next zero crossing in items. So throughout this, I'm probably going to be showing some shortcuts to make your life easier. I also really recommend setting these up, as they'll speed up your workflow like crazy. So as we have the zero crossing point, all I now have to do is just use a kind of similar method as before with the crossfade. Put this to the left and loop this. And now you can see that it's looping perfectly. Now, this example works quite well since it's relatively noisy and there's a lot of stuff going on that isn't tonal. But in more tonal examples or something that is rhythmic or musical, you might notice that zero crossings don't work very well. Some examples might have stuff that changes really quickly when it comes to the timbre of the sound, or maybe it goes from low to high really quickly. It will still loop perfectly well, but you'll notice that, it'll abruptly change really quickly, and that still won't sound very good. So then you might want to use the head-to-tail method or the crossfade method instead of this. But one of the advantages of this is that it's really easy to compute. So if you're doing this as a system in a game or something like that, you should maybe look at zero crossing looping. All right, let's look at the next section. Next, we have some, tips on getting rid of clicks and pops, stuff like fading and denoising. So we already talked about this, but I'll mention it again. Let's say you have a file, you just imported it into your DAW, and you play it. You might notice that it's actually clicking at the beginning and at the end. This is because when your playhead goes over the item, it'll instantly jump from zero volume to whatever volume the waveform has. And this causes a sort of click. So what you can do is you can drag from the top left and the top right of a waveform or a clip item, and you'll add what's called a fade in and fade out. If we play this, there we go. We got rid of the clicks and pops. Let's look at another example here.
Only want to lift you higher. I want to be the one who...
As you may see, if we zoom here, we have a very prominent click that is not at the beginning or the end. This can be a common occurrence when recording stuff. Most of the time, you would then try to have multiple takes or just another take after you figure out that this take is bad, but sometimes you can fix these. In this case, I like this example because it's tonal. It's kind of a note that's being sung. And you can see that the waveform is actually quite consistent here. So let's look at multiple methods on trying to fix this. One of the first methods would be to just, try to make cuts here, just randomly do a sort of crossfade, right? Let's see what happens. Oh, it still didn't work. So what's happening here? You can see that the waveforms are overlapping here. And what that does, especially in an example that is as tonal as this with simple waveforms, is you're going to run it into phase cancellation or partial phase cancellation. What does that mean? The easiest way to explain this is just to think of when you have waveforms and when they interact with other waveforms that are opposite of each other, the sound will cancel out. If you have a waveform and another waveform which are overlapping and they are the exact same as each other, they will double each other's volume. In both cases, you will kind of hear a click or a pop because you're drastically changing the way a sound sounds. So the best thing to do in this case, in a tonal example, is if we go back to where we had our click, we should find a zero crossing, cut there, go to another corresponding point that will continue the waveform's direction. So in this case, it was actually going down at this cut. So find another zero crossing that makes it go down, cut there, delete this part, and then join them. And then if we play this, we hear that it's perfect. In this case, we just fixed this tonal example. Let's look at another example like this. You might have heard that in your right ear. There's a bit of a click here. If we zoom in, so what's happening? Oh, you can even see it right here. Since this is a much less tonal example, we can actually use the other methods. So all we have to do is look at where the click is, cut around it, get rid of that, use a crossfade. Boom, you fixed it. Now let's look at some denoising. This is something you're probably also going to do very commonly. Let's see here. Yeah, first let's look at the noisy sample. You might have heard that there's a lot of background noise happening while these movements are going on, and even in the kind of blank spaces. So this is a perfect example of using some built-in tools within Reaper. This is also possible in programs such as Audacity. So Audacity will have its own denoising tools. In this case, we are using a plugin called Reaffir. What is this? This is literally an effect that is basically just an EQ, an equalizer, which allows you to control different parts of the frequency spectrum using these like bands. In this case, this program makes a profile of your noise, so it will listen to your noise. It will then create a profile around it, and then it will make bands that will cancel out the noisy parts of the frequency spectrum for this noisy clip. Now that sounds kind of complex, but I'll just do it step by step with you guys. First, let's listen to the result here. So you may have noticed it's not perfect. You do have some artifacts, but that's fine. In this case, it's more than good enough for our purposes. So how do you actually do this? Let me turn off this plugin. You'll first want to open your effects window. And we're gonna double click in that empty section and then look up Reaffir, right? I want to double click it. Then it'll load up this plugin. This is the default state. So what I like to do is then right click on this first point and remove it, right? Bring the whole thing to the bottom. And then you want to change the mode to subtract. And this will actually change it to the noise profile building mode. You still have a band here. What I like to do is remove it. And then you're gonna have to press the automatically build noise profile button. But before we do that, I want to find a point in the waveform where we just hear noise as much as possible. It's fine if there's other stuff going on, but really try to find a point where you mostly hear noise. So I already know that it's around here. Yeah, around here. So what we're gonna do is click this button, and then we're gonna play it for a bit and stop it right before other stuff happens. Just like that. And then don't forget to turn off the noise profile builder afterwards. So what we've done now is we've created a profile for the noise, and then all you have to do is then just play the sound, and you have a noise reduced sound. Another way to do this is to use third-party plugins. Let's show you an example here. So this is the Isotope Denoiser. This kind of does the same thing. You even see the EQ profile here. This has a bunch of different and extra controls, such as speed versus quality, threshold, the amount of reduction, all that stuff. But in this case, it will sound like this. Right. So you can see there are much less artifacts going on, and it's a bit of a better plugin in general. It has better quality, but that makes sense since this is a more expensive one as well. So just experiment with the tools that your programs have. Let's move on to the next section, which is clip placement. So this section, all I wanted to kind of demonstrate is that when it comes to building audio, especially when it comes to non-literal stuff, you don't have to be very literal and intentional with your placements. Let's say we have a background going on, we have ambiances, and we're transitioning from one ambience to another, or one scene to another. You do not have to transition the audio exactly at the transition point. So let's listen to this, or like the bad example. Let's say we have this, we're underwater, and then we transition to the wind ambience. See how abrupt that was? Even if we add fades, that doesn't sound very good, does it? So to make this better, we would just bring this back, make the fade longer, make this fade out longer. It's already better. I'd even make it longer, but you get the point. Let's look at another example, another quick one here. Let's imagine we're in a workshop or some kind of smithing area, and there are a bunch of sounds going on, a bunch of hits, hammering, dragging. See here, this already has a bunch of hits. I actually just duplicated it, took another section of it, balanced it more to the right, and then I added some custom hits randomly as well to glue everything together. You can do this kind of stuff even if, let's say, there are a couple of very, very small characters that are not in focus at all in the background that are, hammering or something like that. These hits don't exactly have to match their movement since they're not the focus, right? So just think of it that way. Now let's quickly go over the creative editing section. In this case, we have a bunch of creatively designed cartoony sounds. Let's listen to them. I actually don't have the effects on. Let me turn them on. This one cuts out. So, you have these could act as like servos, I don't know, cartoon robot vocalizations, whatever the hell you might want, but they're very stylized, right? And a lot can just be done by taking audio, reversing it, cutting it up, placing it in different places. This can help with variations, building ideas, inspiration, and whatever. So in this case, with just a couple of effects, some very simple ones, you don't even need a saturation here, but just with a flanger, which is just an effect that adds some movement, and then some stretching and cutting around. We have some interesting stuff going on. And if I turn off these effects, let's take this one, for example. You see how it says rate 3.3 here? It means it's stretched. So if we stretch it back to the original duration, right here, we can kind of hear the original sound. So it's just someone making like a buzzing noise. In this case, I already did this before, but let's make another one. Let's, for example, cut the tail of this one, put it right here. Let's get the head of this one, right? Let's reverse this, and let's crossfade these into each other. Let's see what happens, maybe with some effects on. That's already a new sound, right? So just don't be afraid of experimenting like that. See, in this case, this is just another quick example. I just have like a little loop that's also crossfaded. Let's say we have this also kind of a servo sound effect going on. In this case, what we're doing is applying something called automation here. Now, automation is very complicated, or it's more complex than what this course should get into. But essentially, TLDR, all it does is it just allows you to change parameters over time using curves, right? And in this case, we're just dropping the pitch and increasing it along with the loop. So that's it for the editing section. Hope that wasn't too dry. I'm gonna quickly move over to the game audio tips and tricks section and give you some general tricks and things that you should keep in mind when working on game audio. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was variations. We have some footsteps here, very generic, but when it comes to thinking about how many variations do I want for what sound, it's nice to have a sort of baseline. And what I like to think about always is, okay, how often are you hearing the sound in the game versus how like big it is, right? So in this case, you have like this small sound playing, it's very short, but you're hearing it a lot in game. So you should have a bunch of variations so the players don't get bored as much and don't realize as easily that it's the same sound playing over and over again. So in this case, we have a baseline of around 6 sounds. Let's say we have this right here, which is like an electric zone on the ground. Maybe it's a splash after a grenade in a game or something like that, right? You see it's already a bit longer, it's a bit larger, but it's also less, it's heard less often than the footsteps. So in this case, we still want some variations, but we can have a baseline of around 3 instead of the 6. And now let's have a look at a bigger sound. So maybe you're looking at a boss ability, a big cinematic moment, right? Something like that. And this is heard very sporadically. You're not hearing this that much. And this is a very big sound. You're going to be designing this basically from scratch almost. You're going to basically only need one variation. And I believe that's mostly that for that. Yeah, so let's move on to the rendering. When it comes to rendering, it's a very deep topic, especially when it comes to the different settings, when talking about compression, loading types, encoding, decoding, all these things. So I'm just gonna touch on it surface level, and later on we're gonna give you some resources to get into it, so you can read up on your own about the best practices when it comes to this stuff. So let's say we have a sound here. It's a sword/hit. So when you want to render this, you're mostly going to be looking at selecting the sounds. Let's say we have one of these. You go to your render to file. In this case, I have a shortcut. And this, if we look at this, and we look at find shortcut, and I use this one, file render project to disk. And this will open up this window. And then all you have to do is make sure that this is within your time selection. You've probably seen me do this a lot. This is also another option. Another shortcut, it's set time selection to items. So that's also another useful shortcut to have. So if I Shift G this, it'll time select this. Then we go back to the render window, and then you can click here and select time selection as bounds. And then here you can kind of, in this case, select, I'd recommend just master mix. And then, you give file a name, you give yourself a directory, let's say my downloads folder. Make sure that this is on stereo unless you're explicitly rendering mono files, because most game engines will allow you to change this in engine. Sample rate, I recommend to set this as the same as your project sample rate. Of course, wave as your format. And in this case, I would always recommend to render out for 16-bit when it comes to your bit depth for games. Since that's more than enough, it will give you more than enough audio headroom, so volume headroom to work with. And any more will be overkill, and you're just going to be increasing your file size for literally no reason. Normalize, this can be an option you turn on. What this will do is it will just look at all your files that you're rendering and make sure that they're kind of on the same relative volume levels. Now, in this case, we're rendering one file. How do you render multiple? Well, I recommend to create regions, such as these, for these files. Let's say we are layering as well. So in this case, I created these regions. How do you create regions? Well, you can select these and you do your time selection as shown before. You can actually right-click here and do create region from selection. That'll create these. You can name them as well. If you do edit region, name them. And then you have these regions. You select your items. All you have to do is go back to your rendering matrix, and then you just do selected regions, right? Do select the regions here. Opa, just like that. And then you have selected regions, and you can do master mix again and do the same thing again. So what this will do is it will just like render separate items based on whichever region. There are actually way faster ways of doing this by using things such as custom scripts. These items here are an example of that. This is like a paid one. It allows me to just have these items automatically created, and then I can render stuff out, and they're enumerated automatically as well. But that's for you to look into as well, and we'll send some resources later on as well. And I believe that's it for these. I did want to talk about stuff such as, obviously shortcuts and design effects. What I mean by these in the presentation slide is, the shortcuts. I've been showing some while I was talking. Look into shortcuts. They're there to improve your workflow. They're there to make everything way faster. You don't have to make a ton of shortcuts if this is not your main thing, but I really recommend it, just like any creative software, to have some in your muscle memory. For design sound effects, what I mean by this is, let's say you're working on something, you realize, hey, like this is not going anywhere. This is actually what Jill said already. It is a good idea to maybe go back to the drawing board, try to work with different samples. If it doesn't work, you don't have to put too much time into it. But sometimes if you find something that's already designed and it works perfectly for your project, you can just use that. Don't worry about it. It can be a better decision most of the time if you just move on to something else. And for that, we can actually already move on to the helpful resources. This is a very quick section. All I wanted to say is there are a bunch of links in here, such as links to a Reddit thread with a bunch of cheap or free sound libraries. You can go there. This includes Freesound and stuff like Soundly, which is a great paid library. This includes stuff like the Game Audio Toolbox, which is a very, very, very good repository of different tools that are really useful for game audio. Stuff like the Sonety encoding and decoding section. What this section is literally just a cheat sheet when it comes to compression formats, loading sounds in games and stuff like that. The creator even shows actual performance data, showcasing why something is better than something else. So you should really read into it. And Alcat Games has a really good website where you can actually filter by sound. And here you'll find a bunch of different blogs, YouTube channels, books, everything you might want or need to learn more about game audio. So please look into them if you're interested in this and want to learn more. But I hope this has been useful. And that's it for my lengthy section. And I'll give it away to my colleagues so that they can basically end it off.
Yes, thank you very much, both Jill and Zane. So the helpful resources, we're going to be like putting them in like the video description or caption or whatever is relevant for the platform you're watching this on. Then yeah, for the Q&A, just comment, send us questions, contact us. Feel free to do so. We love answering questions. We love helping people. And I think Jill can also like take it over and like give some more words, I guess, for the outro.
Yeah, again, leave any comments. You can reach us through our website, which will be below in the description.
Yep.
There's contact forms there. You can contact us on LinkedIn through the website. Please do so. We're always willing to help with any sort of question. Yeah, thank you for your time.
Yes, thank you very
Thank you.
much for
Thank you.
joining us in this 1 hour long journey, 1 hour and 7 minutes. I hope that you enjoyed it and learned something, obviously. And we really hope that after this one, we're gonna have some new competition in the sound design market. But yeah,
See.
that's it. Bye bye.
Goodbye.